Our reading this morning picks up the story of Easter later on in the same day. That's important for us to remember. I mean, we're reading it now a week later, but this was later on the same day. The disciples are gathered behind closed and locked doors. Their apprehension's understandable. After all, they've seen their beloved teacher and Lord go from his triumphal entry a week ago into the city of Jerusalem through this week of chaos and through his trial and execution at the hands of the Romans at the instigation of the religious leaders of the time. And now they're huddled together, afraid that they might be next, afraid that these same authorities might be after them. By now they've heard the accounts of the women who went to the tomb that morning and found it empty. And Peter and John have even gone to the tomb and verified that it was empty. They may even have heard Mary Magdalene's account of how she believed she had encountered the risen Jesus in the garden outside the tomb. But at this point, they're still trying to process all this. I think they can be forgiven for some confusion and some doubt. After all of this is way beyond anything they've ever had experience with. As much as they might want to believe that Jesus is somehow alive, they can't get past the fact that they've seen his body taken down from the cross, wrapped in a shroud, put in a tomb, and the stone rolled in front of the tomb. Are these crazy reports true? Are they the hallucination? Are they the product of fevered imagination brought on by the trauma of the week? Or is it really true? They don't know what to believe at this point. But suddenly, Jesus is there, somehow in the middle of that locked room, standing among them, and he greets them, his obviously troubled, astonished disciples with, "Peace be with you." I think it's significant that Jesus doesn't seem to be disappointed in his disciples for their lack of belief at this point. After all, during his earthly ministry with them, he was never all that shy about chiding them for lack of faith. We remember any number of times when he said, "You have little faith, why don't you believe this?" Or even the time after the transfiguration when he tried to foretell his death and Peter tried to rebuke him and say, "This must never happen to you." And Jesus turned on him and said, "Get behind me, Satan." I always imagine Peter's spirit just wilting at that harsh criticism from his beloved teacher and Lord. Yet this time, he doesn't seem to be troubled by their doubts and their fears. He accepts that as a part of their normal human condition, and he moves immediately to assuage their doubts. He shows them his hands, he shows them his side, he shows them the physical, tangible evidence that it is in fact Jesus, and he really is standing among them. And at this, their doubt gives way to faith. I think that's the way God deals with all of us. After all, we all have our moments and times of doubt, don't we? I know I do. But God doesn't judge us for having doubts. They're a normal part of our human condition. It seems just as we're not capable of perfect obedience, neither are we capable of perfect faith. That's why Jesus had to come. But if we're serious about having a relationship with God, God will move toward us and will bring us toward himself. God will move to assuage our doubts, calm our fears, and draw us into a deeper relationship with God. I've had a number of experiences of that in my own life, beginning right at the start of my own Christian walk. Some of you know that my Christian walk began at a Young Life camp in Colorado, the August of the summer after my senior year in high school. It was a joyous, literally a mountaintop experience. But I was going to be going away to college in just a couple of weeks, and there was all kinds of opportunity for doubt to creep in. I had done enough reading by that time to know the parable of the sower and the seed that fell on rocky ground, and it sprang up quickly, but as soon as the sun hit it, it withered and died because it had no root. And I understood enough to know that if I didn't find a Christian community to become rooted in, that could be me. So as I came home from that camp and I was preparing to go to college, I was praying, "Lord, please let me find a group of people who know what this life of faith is. Let me find some people who understand what this is about so that I can become rooted in this and so that I can grow. Well, I got to campus, moved into a men's dormitory, and the first week that we were all there, we had our first hall meeting. So all the guys on the floor, out in the hallway, on the floor, and our hall counselors at the front telling us about the rules of dorm life and what we could expect and what the resources were that were available to us and so forth. And then at the end of it, one of the counselors stood up and said, on a personal note, my name's Dick Fisher, and I'm the president of the campus chapter of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And if any of you would like to get a Bible study going in the dorm, please see me after the meeting. Well, I think the words after the meeting were still coming out of his mouth, and my feet were already moving. That was the start of a friendship of several years. Dick was my first spiritual mentor, big brother in the faith, and really helped me to get grounded in the faith and connected with this Christian community on campus. That was my first experience with dramatically answered prayer and my first experience with God meeting me in the middle of my doubts and moving me toward stronger faith. This is also exactly what Jesus does with his disciple Thomas. Thomas was not with the other disciples the first time Jesus appeared, and when they tell him about having seen Jesus, he naturally responds with doubt. He wants to see the evidence for himself. He wants to see the physical, tangible evidence that this is real. When Jesus comes back the next time, he moves immediately to reassure and to address Thomas's doubts. Jesus comes and knows exactly the doubts that Thomas has expressed and moves to reassure him. You needed to see my hands? Here, see my hands. You needed to see my side? Here, touch my side. And at that, Thomas obviously is awestruck and can only respond, my Lord and my God. Thomas has been moved from doubt to belief. Even today, we see God doing that in the lives of people all around us. In fact, seeing God's transforming power in the lives of other people is one of the most powerful witnesses that we have. Shortly after college, I didn't really have a church home per se. I didn't have a connection with a church. I had tried a couple of churches, but without really finding a fit. But my college buddy John and I had found our spiritual home and source of nurture in the faith in a group known as the Pittsburgh Experiment. The Pittsburgh Experiment was founded in the 1950s by a man named Sam Shoemaker. It's a non-denominational Christian ministry that deals mostly with people in the business community in the Pittsburgh area. And they are well acquainted with how God moves to address people's doubts. The group takes its name from a practice called the 30-day prayer experiment. This is something that Sam Shoemaker introduced and the experiment continued practicing. This is geared toward someone who is truly exploring, really seeking, wanting to know whether this faith thing is real or not, but they're not really convinced. They're not sure whether God is real or not. So what happens is the person who is seeking will be partnered with a member of the experiment, and they covenant to pray every day for 30 days. God, if you're truly there, show me. Do something in my life to let me know that you're real. It's not a prayer that you pray lightly, because the second half of it, whether spoken or not, is that you're prepared that if God does show up in your life, that you're prepared to make the commitment. You're prepared to commit your life to Christ. You're prepared to become a disciple. You don't go down that road unless you're willing to make that commitment. But it's been their consistent experience with the hundreds and even thousands of people who have undertaken this experiment. Day 30 never comes. one way or another, God shows up in that person's life and moves them from doubt to faith. Through the years since that time, I've seen God at work in my life and in the lives of people around me in a number of ways. In fact, I think at this point, it would require a greater leap of faith, if you will, for me to somehow believe that God wasn't there than it does for me to believe that God is there. I've seen too many instances where God has shown up in my life and in the lives of other people around me. In fact, that's one of the reasons that Christian fellowship is so important to us. That's one of the ways in which God uses us to minister to one another. When Jesus turns to Thomas and says, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." When he says that, he's talking about us, about you and me. If we're truly serious about seeking a deeper relationship with God, if we're truly seeking a closer walk with Christ, God will move to us in the middle of our doubts, draw us into faith, draw us into a closer relationship until we too can stand before the risen Christ and say with Thomas, "My Lord and my God." Amen.